Well, hello and welcome back to class number 7 on the Word Faith Movement. This class is a little bit different. I'm doing this here in my office. I did record some of this in the classroom. Didn't care for the way some of my points came out, so I'm going to try it here again. We're continuing on the theme of my response on a word of words, a word on words. And this whole class we're going to be covering just this one passage here. Mark chapter 11 verses 22 through 24. This count is also paralleled in Matthew chapter 21 too. However, the Word Faith teachers, when they use this verse, this narrative, they always use the Mark passage. They might sometimes use the Matthew passage. I haven't seen it. They always seem to focus in on Mark chapter 11. This is a very pivotal verse for them and very important. That's why we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it, making sure we understand all the different nuances of what's going on and how the Word Faith movement tries to use this verse to support some of their ideas. This is the verse that Kenneth Hagin, Dad Hagin, used, or didn't use, but he was in his hospital bed when he was very young, and he read this verse and came to believe through this verse that you can speak your health into existence, and he did so up until 2003, I think it is. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to start looking at this, and I also want to acknowledge that there are different ways that evangelicals use when they look at this verse. There are some that use this as almost, this is kind of a living parable. This is the narrative where the background of Mark chapter 11, you have Jesus and his disciples are walking along. They see a fig tree and there's nothing on it, and Jesus sees the fig tree and he curses it. And when they see the fig tree next, it has withered and died, and the apostles are all surprised and shocked at this, and Jesus takes this as an opportunity to teach them about faith. Some people use this, they view this as like a living parable. Instead of Jesus telling a parable, he kind of demonstrates a parable by showing how he curses the fig trees the same way Israel is going to be cursed. I don't take this approach. I see this as being Jesus giving them a lesson on faith. N.T. Wright is one of the scholars who take the living parable approach. I have a lot of respect for his knowledge and all that. I just disagree with that. And this is something that we can still be brothers and agree to disagree on this, I hope. But Mark chapter 11, it starts off, verse 22. They come, they see the tree is withered, and they ask Jesus, they show Jesus the tree, they're surprised and shocked. Jesus responds and says to them, have faith in God. Have faith in God. Now, when the Word Faith teachers use this verse, what they want to do is try to show us this verse means that God has faith, and we need to have the kind of faith that God has. And there's, just looking at the verse on the surface level, you can't figure out, now how would they do that? Have faith in God. How would this mean that God has faith and we're supposed to have it? Well, two different ways that they change the words here in Mark 11. And one of them we can hear from Paula White in her sermon here.
That's what it means to have faith in God. Literally is translated. The real actual Greek and Hebrew is have the faith of God. You're going to have the same substance in God that stepped out on nothing, spoke to nothing, and created everything. You're going to have the faith of God.
According to Paula White then, according to the original, she says the Greek and Hebrew, but the Greek here in Mark 11, it's supposed to be the faith of God. And this is supposed to be the literal translation of it. I looked at 28 different versions of the Bible, and I found that 24 of them say, have faith in God. One of them said, believe in God, exact same concept, but only 3 of these 28 that I looked at said something like this, have the faith of God. 3 different versions put it that way. So there is some substance to what they're saying. It could be rendered, have the faith of God. But why such a difference? Because you can see how it makes quite a difference to say have the faith of God instead of have faith in God. Because having the faith of God, that means God has faith, and therefore Jesus is telling them that we should have faith in the same way that God has faith. But that's not what it's really trying to say. It's interesting, these 3 versions of the Bible that had have the faith of God were very, very old translations. We had the Douay-Rheims edition of the Bible, Wycliffe, and Young's literal translation. hundreds of years old, some of these translations, that would render it have the faith of God. Now, you might think, well, that shouldn't matter how old the translation is. It still rendered it that way. It actually does, because, see, words and language change over time. No modern translation puts it have the faith of God, because we don't speak that way today. And we would misunderstand the point that's being made. The only way they can make their point then is use these really old translations to show us it's supposed to be have the faith of God. The words change, the definitions of words, how we use words. I mean, even in our own lifetime we can see how words change. I remember when I was a kid in grade school, we used to play this game. The way we played this game, all the kids would line up on one side of the field, and one kid would stand in the center of the field, and he would yell, "Go," and all the kids would have to run past him to the other side. And he would have to tackle as many people as he possibly could by the time everybody got over. And then they would just keep going until the last person is standing. The name of that game, we would never, kids might play this game today, but they would never call it this now. It's called Smear the Queer. Not a politically correct name for a game that kids would play today. Names, words, definitions, the way we use words, they change over time. And so it's good to have modern translations, because it can help us see how things should be read in our language today. You know, one example of this is in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 15. Paul says, "We which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep." This is in the King James Version. Now, if you think about it, that's kind of curious. He's talking about when the Lord comes, when Jesus comes, talking about two different people, people who are alive and people who are dead. People who are alive are not going to prevent them who are asleep. Now, how could people who are alive prevent Jesus from taking people who are dead with him? We couldn't do that. Why would he even make that point? Well, the reason he makes that point is because in the King James, the word prevent in Elizabethan English means something different than it means today. So our modern translations will put it in the vernacular that we use now. If you look at any modern translation now, it will use the word precede. We who are alive will not precede those who have fallen asleep. Christ is going to, when he comes, he's going to be taking those first, and then those who are living. That's a simple, easy to understand thing when you look at a modern translation, but you look at older translations, it doesn't have it that way. All the new ones will have faith in God. Now, this is one way that they try to change Mark 11:22 to back up their theology that God has faith and we need to have it too. The other one here is explained by Kenneth Hagin. He says, "Let us focus our attention on the statement, have faith in God." Or as the margin reads, have the faith of God. I don't know what margin he's reading. Maybe an older King James Bible that has that, I'm not sure. But listen how he continues. Greek scholars tell us this should be translated, have the God kind of faith. Have the God kind of faith. It's a very interesting statement he makes. Have the God kind of faith. What does that mean to have the God kind of faith? What they want to say from this is that, see, God has faith, and we need to have that kind of faith. And that's what Jesus is trying to tell us. We need to have the kind of faith that God has. What kind of faith does he have? The faith where he believed in his heart that his words would contain power. When he spoke his words, he created things. That's the kind of faith that God has, and we need to have that kind. But Hagin says that Greek scholars tell us this. Now, people have looked and sought after Greek scholars of Kenneth Hagin's time when he made statements like this to find out who in the world said something like this. And it's pretty much narrowed down to only one person people have been able to find that have said, have the God kind of faith. And that would be this gentleman right here. This is A.T. Robertson. Robertson says, "We rightly translate have faith in God, though the genitive does not mean in, but only the God kind of faith." Now, if you don't know who Robertson is, at this point you might be thinking, who's this schmo trying to twist language around to try to make this sound like prosperity gospel? You might think he's a prosperity teacher himself. He's not. A.T. Robertson was probably one one of the most well-respected Greek scholars in America that there's ever been. For me, when I'm doing my study of Scripture, if I'm not sure on a passage and I'm looking at different commentaries, if Robertson says something, I pretty much take it, because his theology, his Greek, everything is just very, very good, very, very polished. So Word Faith Camp really likes that they have somebody like A.T. Robertson on their side saying that this verse should mean the God kind of faith. And what Robertson says in his grammar here is that the word God in context, it's what they call in Greek an objective genitive. It's an objective genitive, and he says the genitive does not mean in, but only the God kind of faith. The problem, though, is when Robertson says this, the God kind of faith, Word Faith folks interpret Robertson. They think that they're just taking him literally what he says, but instead they're interpreting what he's saying, and they think he means one thing, but he doesn't. Here, let's ask questions this way. Does have the God kind of faith mean, there's two different options here, at least that we're going to be looking at. Does have the God kind of faith, does it mean have the type of faith that God has? Or does it mean have faith in God, the way that it's always taken? And of course, prosperity teachers, like Word Faith teachers, would say it's number one, have the type of faith that God has. They think it's intuitive. It sounds kind of like it, but I don't think that's what Robertson means. Now, one way we can know how an objective genitive should be translated and what it means in context is we can look at other verses in the Scriptures where there's an objective genitive and we can see how it's used. For example, let's go to the book of Romans. Apostle Paul says, they are zealous for God, but not based on knowledge. The word God here, it's the same thing in Mark 11:22, the word God is an objective genitive. So with the objective genitive, they're zealous for God, we might wonder, could this be also thought of as the God kind of zeal? But what does the God kind of zeal mean? We still need to ask that question. Two different options. Same as we looked at the other one. Does have the God kind of zeal mean have the type of zeal that God has? As if God has zeal, and now we need to have the kind of zeal that he has, and of the people that he's talking about, that's what their problem is? Or they have the zeal for God. Well, it's pretty clear, looking in context, they are zealous for God. They have zeal towards God. However, they don't have an accurate knowledge of God. So their zeal of God is misplaced because they don't have an accurate knowledge. It's not that they have the same kind of zeal God has. That wouldn't even make sense in the context. But I think even a better example is found here in Romans chapter 3, verse 18. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Again, God is an objective genitive in the Greek. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Could this be thought of as the God kind of fear? There is no God kind of fear before their eyes. If we were to think of it that way, what does God kind of fear mean? A couple different options. Same thing we looked at before. There we go. Does the God kind of fear mean the type of fear that God has? Or have fear of God? Which would this possibly mean? Clearly, it's not saying that God has fear and that these people don't have that kind of fear. Not at all. There is no fear of God before them. They're not afraid of God. They do these things and these acts and their works and their beliefs without any kind of fear that God is there and is going to bring punishment or justice to them because of it. So the God kind of fear means option number 2, have the fear of God. The objective genitive always points to the second object that we've been looking at here, the second option, have the fear of God, have zeal for God, and also the God kind of faith then would mean have the faith in God. There we go. Have faith in God is what Jesus is telling them, not have the type of faith that God has. Now, what's interesting, even the quote that we looked at from A.T. Robertson, look what he said here. They want to focus on the second part of this that says, though the genitive does not mean in, but only the God kind of faith. They like that part. But what did he say originally? We rightly translate have faith in God. So if we rightly translate have faith in God, why did he say this other part about the God kind of faith? See, the problem with them going to A.T. Robertson and using him at a point like this is A.T. Robertson is quite a brain and quite a scholar, and he's speaking to Greek students and teaching them about objective genitives. If you don't know Greek and you don't know what objective genitives are, you'll misunderstand what he means by the God kind of faith. I've had 3.5 years of college Greek, and I've still got to say, sometimes I wrestle with the objective genitive and how it should be translated and why it's an objective genitive, not a descriptive genitive, or whatever. There's many different kinds of genitives. It's a very difficult, complex subject, and to just say that anyone who has no background in this can open it up and understand exactly what the scholar means when he's teaching Greek people or Greek students about the genitive, well, therein lies the problem. It is rightly translated, have faith in God. That's what it means. Jesus is telling us, have faith in God. And what is faith? It's trust. He's saying, trust God, not speak faith-filled words. Trust God. And we can see this idea carried on throughout the rest of the verse. Now you can see I've divided up the verse into, verse 23 and 24 side by side, because there's kind of a parallelism going on here, which kind of helps us look at the verse and understanding these two verses and how they play out. First, let me read it. So he starts out, have faith in God, Jesus answered. Verse 23, I tell you the truth, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he says will happen, it will be done for him. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Okay, so several things that we can point out here. First of all, they like this word anyone in verse 23 here. The word anyone, or in King James Version, whoever or whosoever, which, by the way, this is NIV that I have up here. I would normally want to put the King James here because this is what they use, is King James on this verse normally. The reason why I have NIV is because it's just less wordy and easier to outline like this. But anyone or whoever, whosoever here in verse 23, this points out that it doesn't have to be a follower of Christ. Remember, we outlined when we were talking about how they understand faith and the power of words, that you don't have to be a believer to have the power of words. It's inherent in your being. Anyone can speak faith-filled words. Anyone believes something and speaks out and creates that different kind of reality. And they say this is backed up here in verse 23. If anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea. Now to the subject of mountain. Let me see here. Sometimes they will take this definitely in a literal sense, that you can go out and create this kind of reality happen in the world where you are speaking faith-filled words and transforming things, such as speaking to a mountain. Or Mr. Creflo Dollar here will show you how we're able to speak to weather, kind of like Jesus did when he calmed storms.
I realize I have authority that's been granted to me by the Almighty God, and some news guy telling me to hurry up and go in hiding because the tornado's coming. It's a coming, you go in hiding. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I ain't gonna go hide. I'm looking at Dancing with the Stars. I'm trying to see what Kurt Warner gonna do. I ain't gonna hide. I went outside and got on my porch and I said, now in the name of Jesus, I am a man authorized by God to release authority in the earth. You storm, you will not come my way. Not a tree on my property will be affected. And I released my authority. Now I sat down and went and watched Kurt Warner.
So even though Creflo Dollar didn't use this verse, you can see how they take this idea or concept literally to where you have then command of physical forces around you, speaking to a mountain, speaking to the weather, or what have you. But surprisingly, they don't always take this in that kind of a literal fashion. It's often used as a figurative thing as well. I've read this from Charles Capps, from Kenneth Hagin himself, and well, also here Joel Osteen is going to explain as well how this is used by them in a metaphorical sense.
I want to talk to you today about having mountain-moving faith. In life, we all face mountains. Maybe a mountain in your marriage. You don't see how you'll stay together. A mountain in your finances. Doesn't look like you'll ever get out of debt or ever accomplish your dreams. Maybe it's a mountain in your health. The experts have said that you're never going to get well. Some of you are struggling in your finances. You need to get your checkbook out and speak favor over it. You have a child that won't do right. Quit complaining about him and start speaking favor over him. You're in a legal situation. Start talking to your mountain. When you declare favor, God says He will turn your mountains into molehills.
Now, of course, I would agree with this, that it would be speaking more of a metaphorical or symbolic or whatever kind of sense, in that mountain moving faith. You have mountains in your life, things that you can speak to or whatever. But let's get to the verse here, verse 23. The things that they're going to want to point out here. Verse 23. Notice here it says, "If anyone says," and to the next box here, "and believes that what he says will happen." These are the ingredients of faith that we've covered this ad nauseum, right? If anyone says, you have to believe in your heart, and then you speak it out. That's what this verse is telling us, right? You believe in your heart, and then you speak it out. It releases that creative energy that we have within us. We can speak that out. Our words have power and create those things in order that they will happen. Now, I believe there is something going on here figurative. And the figurative part, and have patience with me, I can show you that even the Word Faith Movement is going to agree with me here, is this figurative thing is called hyperbole. Hyperbole is a figure of speech where you overstate something for effect. Like if I were to say, "I am so hungry I could eat a cow." Now, is that true? Literally, am I so hungry I could actually eat an entire cow? Of course not. It's a hyperbole. And the point of the hyperbole is to show you just how extremely hungry I really am. I'm so hungry I could eat this beast that is obviously too large for me to actually eat. And I think going on in verse 23 and 24 here as well is hyperbole too. There is a major overstatement but for effect by Jesus. The reason why I would say that, and the Word Faith Movement, I think you'll see, or they're going to agree here, is that no, it takes more than just believing in your heart and speaking it out. Remember when we looked at 3 John chapter 2, they say that you need to have spiritual growth in your life. You can't be in sin and still be able to use the words of power within your words and your faith in order to cause things to happen. Bill Winston here explains.
And condemnation, guilt, shame, and all these things will not only distort the picture of how you see yourself, but it will distort the revelation that you can get from God. There is therefore now what? No condemnation. Now, if I take a glass of water and I'll shine a light through it, this light will come in, the water will allow the light to pass right through. But if I take the water and I put some mud in it and stir it up, now all of a sudden it's hindering the light that would come in. Condemnation is mud that hinders the light and power of God from coming through you and being able to address the needs of humanity.
So we can all agree now on the idea that there is some hyperbole going on. There's some major figures of speech going on in what Jesus is telling us here. And but I ultimately don't think that he is now promising us that we can just, as Kenneth Hagin would say, you can write your own ticket with God. You can, basically, Jesus has given us a blank check that now we can just take anything, we can just claim anything, and we can have whatever it is we want. We believe in our heart and speak it out, and we can have anything. No, I think that this is, the way it's being phrased here is part of what the hyperbole is. Now, let me explain it this way. Let's say I'm sitting at home one day and I'm reading a book or the newspaper or something, and my son comes along and wants to ask me something, but he's being kind of shy about it. Instead of just walking up and saying, "Hey, Dad, I want such and such," he's kind of he's afraid of bothering me, of getting in the way of my reading or whatever. And I'm reading my book and I see him come up to me, and I'm thinking, okay, here it goes again. And he comes up, he's a third grade, 9-year-old good boy. He comes up and he's like hemming and hawing, and I close my book and I look at him and say, "All right, son, what do you want?" And he's still not being forthright. He's like, "Oh, well, Dad, I'm wondering, would it be okay?" And see, I kind of even know what he wants. I know what's on his heart. We ate dinner about an hour ago. This kid wants candy. And you know what? I don't care if he has candy. I'll let him have candy. But the problem is he's being so shy about it. So I want to take this as an opportunity to give him a lesson about his dad and my care about him and his ability to come up and just be bold and ask me the question. So as he's kind of him and hawing and not really getting around to his question, I say to him this. I say, son, trust me. All you have to do is just say the word and you'll get what you want. So just come out and ask me for what you want and you'll get it. Okay? I say this to him and he kind of sheepishly says, yeah, okay, Dad, can I have some candy? I say, sure, son. You ate a good dinner. Go ahead and have some candy. That's your dessert. Enjoy. Now, why did I say this? I said this because I wanted to instill confidence in him that he can come to me and ask what he wants. There's hyperbole, major hyperbole going on here. For instance, when I said this, all you have to do is just say the word and you'll get what you want. Am I trying to tell him his words have magical powers that can create the candy? No. We have this idiom in our English language. When you say just say the word and it'll happen, that means we're going to do it for you, and rather quickly. It's what it basically means. Just say the word and it'll happen. It doesn't mean magic power is released. That's part of the hyperbole that I'm talking about, that when you say these things, just say the word and you'll get what you want. Now, and also, you have to balance it with what else is said. Because I didn't just say, all you have to do is say the word. I also said, right after that, come and ask me for what you want and you'll get it. Okay? And all this is in the context of relationship, because I start out, son, trust me. Trust me. All you have to do. Now, am I giving my son a blank check where all he has to do now is come and ask me for anything, and I'm bound by my words that he will get whatever he wants? No. That's the way hyperbole functions. Just like I'm not actually hungry enough to eat an entire cow. No, he's not going to get absolutely anything that he wants. And it's kind of intuitive. We know that. My third grade son knows now, after hearing this, that he can't come to me and say, Dad, can you give me the car keys? I want to drive over to my friend's house. He knows the idea in, no, he doesn't know the word hyperbole. He understands, and what I said didn't mean absolutely anything that he wants. He knows I love him. He knows he's not asking for anything too crazy. He can just be bold and come to me and ask. Same thing we see happening with what Jesus is saying here. It begins in verse 22 in that same context of relationship. Have faith in God. Trust God. Like I started with my son. Son, trust me. Have faith in God. And if you balance the first verse 23 with verse 24, like I showed you with my son, you'll see the word ask. So it's not just anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea. Verse 24 says, whatever you ask for in prayer. Okay, it's this relational thing. And it's not writing this blank check. And now you can just get whatever you want. As Bill Winston pointed out, you still have to be growing. You have to be following God. Even there, they realize the hyperbole. James 4:3, you ask and you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives so you may spend it on your pleasures. So no, you don't get just this blank check. That's not what Jesus is saying. But he's saying, boldly come and ask. But as we've seen with the Word Faith movement, when they're talking about getting things that you want from God, whether it be health or finances or what, it's not about the asking God. It's not a request of God. It's the believing in your heart and speaking out faith-filled words to create the realities that you want. You don't go to God and ask. The clip that I showed you of Joel Osteen just a little bit ago, in context with this, he talks about this very idea that it's not an asking and requesting of God.
A lot of times we're praying about our mountains. God, please help me. God, please make my child straighten up. God, please take away this fear. And yes, it's good to pray. It's good to ask God to help us. But when you face a mountain, it's not enough to just pray. It's not enough to just believe. It's not enough to just think good thoughts. Here's the key. You have to speak to your mountains. Friends, incredible power is released when we speak to our mountains. Some of you today are praying about things you should be speaking to. you don't need to pray about that fear anymore. You need to say, fear, I command you to leave. I will not allow you in my life. Instead of begging God to heal you, you need to start talking to that sickness. Sickness, you have no right in my body. I'm a child of the Most High God. You are not welcome here. And I'm not asking you to leave. I'm not saying, pretty please, do me a favor. No, I'm commanding you to leave my body. If you're going to have mountain-moving faith, you've got to speak to your mountains.
So, there's one thing that they like to point out. Believe in your heart, speak it out. Another thing they like to point out, and this is very, very much into their culture, and they get this from this verse right here, verse 24, says, believe that you have received it. You have to believe, already believe that you have received it. So when you are praying about sickness, you don't say, God, please help me, please heal me, please take care of this cancer or whatever it is. You have to believe that you've already received it. You say, thank you, God, for your healing. Thank you that I am healed. Thank you that my cancer is gone. You have to believe that you have already received it. I would say this is still part of the same hyperbole. He is overstating this, way overstating this, for the effect to let us know the confidence that we can come before God. Now, the reason why I would say that this is definitely figurative here is you need to balance it with the rest of everything that he said here. He's not giving us two different things that he's saying. First of all, you're supposed to believe in your heart and then speak it out and then you'll get it, because that's what he said before, remember? In verse 23, what we just looked at says, believe that what he says will happen. That's future tense. Now, the verse 24, believe that you have received it, that's past tense. You have to believe that you have received it. However, the parallel verse 23 says that you don't have it yet. He says that it will happen. And that's not the only occasion here. Look at this. Bottom of verse 23 says it will be done for you. So believe that what he says will happen, and then it will be done. It hasn't been done yet. And then over in verse 24, the end of it, it will be yours. So you believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And even the idea of ask too. Whatever you ask for in prayer. You don't ask for something that you already have. My son came up to me and he's eating his candy bar saying, hey Dad, can I have a candy bar? I say, you're already eating one, get out of here. He's already got it. You don't ask for something you already have. Jesus is just driving home the idea, the boldness that you can, confidence you can come to with God. And when you ask him these things, he is going to positively respond to us. Again, still not a blank check. You're going to get whatever you want at any time. It needs to be, your heart needs to be in the right place, growing with Christ. Also, the concept of, is this in his will? Now, I know Word Faith folks just like to, they furl at the idea of us praying if it's in God's will. I'm going to be getting into this a little more in one of the last class sessions that we have about praying in God's will, but just enough to say right now that this is a very valid way to pray, although, as I'm going to make this point again later on too, I do think evangelicals, we do abuse this concept sometimes of praying in God's will. However, it's a very valid thing. You know, for us, our prayers to work as we approach God boldly, as Jesus is suggesting we do, yes, we do need to be sure that our heart is in the right place, and are we praying according to God's will? The Word Faith movement would have us believe that it's always God's will to heal, always God's will to prosper us financially. However, the scriptures don't back this up, and we're going to get into that a little bit as well, too. But enough to say right now, let's say if you were praying that you come into health and that you're going to live through whatever health crisis that you're facing. I would call it biblical presumption to say that God is always going to heal everything and keep your life going. For instance, let's just look at one passage for now, and this will be dealt in more in depth later. James chapter 4, starting in verse 13. It says, now then, listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or to that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. It's a very biblical-centered idea to pray if it is God's will. We do need to make sure that our prayer is according to God's will, and we need to be able to submit to His sovereignty. Maybe He has different ideas of what He wants to happen through the illness or the financial crisis or whatever it is in our life. We need to submit to Him, go to Him boldly and tell Him what's on our hearts, what's on our mind, but be able to submit to His will in case it's different than what we think it ought to be. So much for my response on words with the Word Faith Movement. Next we will be getting into the categories of prosperity, health and wealth and finances, those kind of things. So stay tuned, and I think this next section will be a lot of fun. I look forward to it and hope you do as well. Thank you.